When you look at this climate question, it's fine in terms of a trade deal here or another agreement there. But when the COP happens in Glasgow, and when, for example, the Prime Minister's in Washington in two or 3 weeks from now to meet with Joe Biden, it's not as easy to just brush aside a question when it comes from the President of the United States or the Prime Minister of the UK, our two closest historical allies.
Yeah, you're quite right, Kieran. That's certainly true. But it's also true to say that the government has been, well practiced at this. It's been doing it for a long time. The coalition's in its third term. It's been for all of that time sort of treading this line, either in sort of straight out denial in some places or sort of fudging it. And at the moment, as we saw in the press conference the Prime Minister did earlier today, when asked about this, he says, well, with trade deals, we put trade provisions in there, and with climate deals or climate agreements, that's where we make references to those. So when it comes up from Boris Johnson or from the President of the United States, I imagine that Scott Morrison's line would be, well, we will meet and beat our Paris targets. That is what our obligation is to do, and we'll have further things to say about it down the track. Now, whether that's convincing or not, I don't know, but you know what diplomacy is like. Everyone's looking for some level of dismount to enable the relationship to keep on going. So I guess we'll just see how that plays out.
That's true, and I know that there's a record of it, but for me, it's coming to a head for Scott Morrison in the sense that you've got Joe Biden saying this is his number one foreign policy priority is climate response. The climate change is an issue. Boris Johnson is saying he wants the COP summit to be a great success, really their first foray post-Brexit for a big international commitment. And then at home, you've got the likes of Matt Canavan and Barnaby Joyce pulling the PM in another direction. It's a very, very tricky one for him to navigate. But I think the heat will be on, certainly from the Biden administration, and that's happening within weeks.
Yeah, look, I don't disagree, and I'm certainly not trying to make apologies for the Prime Minister's approach here. I think it is, I think it's dualistic and insincere, effectively. I mean, people are being fudged on both sides of this, and essentially the government's not moving. And what I think is fascinating about the story that Sky News has in relation to that the text associated with that UK-Australia trade deal, is that really it's not that material that references to temperature, global temperature, for example, are included in an agreement, as was the case between the UK and Europe. And yet we see Australia playing hardball. So Australia, under the Morrison government on this question, has been carving out for itself quite a hardline reputation for some time now. So some sort of rhetorical shift by the Prime Minister in his discussions with the President may be forthcoming. Perhaps he will make those sorts of comments more publicly. I do think it's a very difficult thing for him to keep essentially running two tracks on this. So we'll see exactly how they go about that. I mean, there'd been a lot of speculation all year that Scott Morrison would find a way sometime between the early part of the year and November, when this Glasgow climate change conference happens, that sometime during that period he would find a way to make that net zero commitment that he has sort of shimmied up towards by saying that he wants it to happen by 2050 or preferably sooner, but he hasn't made the commitment. Whether that commitment comes or not, I guess it's hard to know, but the window, as you say, is closing, and in those discussions with the President, the pressure will be on. We'll just have to see how Scott Morrison navigates that.
Yeah, and I don't think that those allies will want to be dudded by one of their closest friends on that front. So the Prime Minister's pragmatic on it, and he's said as much, in terms of the financial markets and so on moving in that direction. I'd expect some movement from him, Mark. And in terms of the roadmap out of New South Wales today, the PM was very supportive of that, wasn't he, when he said that this is honouring the deal that National Cabinet did with the Australian people?
He was, and of course he's had some missteps on this, or at least some misfortune on this, when he was lauding New South Wales a while ago as the gold standard when it wouldn't go into lockdown, and of course delaying a lot of restrictions really exacerbated the situation that we now see in New South Wales. But on the other side, I think there is a ray of sunshine here, the possibility of a way out of this thicket of restrictions that New South Wales in particular and Victoria are suffering with at the moment, and indeed the ACT where we sit. And I think there's some logic to what the New South Wales government is arguing. It is consistent with the national plan that that's been under some pressure from those outlying states, Queensland and WA. And so it's not surprising in a way that he's standing behind the New South Wales government. But as I say, I think there's something to be said also for saying to people, to the communities in these states, when we get to vaccination levels that are sufficient, there will be a staged releasing of some of these very tight restrictions, that life will start to move back towards something approximating what life used to be. Now, it's going to be a very incremental process, and I think governments will need to be very careful about it. But I don't think it's the wrong thing to do for either the New South Wales government or indeed the federal government to be holding out that hope for people, because hope is in short supply in this country at the moment.